Modernity, at the cusp of the 20th century, was born in a time in history that will probably never be repeated. It led to a change in not only how the world was viewed, but how it was experienced and captured through art. It was a time in which the future was bright and full of possibilities. Technology was changing the individual and collective experience of the world, and moments of technological miracles converged. It was during this time that Cubism made its appearance. According to Berger, in his essay, The Moment of Cubism, this was the time that Cubism was at its purest. Cubist artists don't imitate nature itself, but rather the activity of nature. Cubist art presents a fragmented view of the world that is all about simultaneity and speed, destruction and reconstruction, time and space, or in other words, perspective. Picasso tapped into this fragmented view of the world to create the first Cubist paintings. His art resonated with the world around him because the traditional representation of a static world no longer worked. There was too much change, too much speed to be captured by the traditional art forms. Cubist artists attempted to capture the fractured, fragmented, and discontinuous aspects of the world. Cubist literature attempts the same. A poem is this dance of the many broken things, a physical, sensual performance, an act of straining against the limits of expressibility from within language. It is a collecting and reordering, a refiguring and refreshing of the components of reality into a new and full being, a complex unity that is itself a new reality. This quote was by Menzin. This part of poetry is what shares in the expression of Cubist art. The world was changing at such a rapid, uneven pace, thus changing the experiences of reality. No longer could the world be considered in one picture from one angle, but space and time needed to be considered as well. Thus was born the idea of perspective. According to Daniel Hurwitz, conventional ways of viewing time and space no longer applied. One's position in time and space must be considered as part of a whole, but not the entire whole. This is perspective. Because of perspective, a new kind of observer was born, one who is required to dig for meaning, to be able to interpret depth and perception, an expert on space and time. This kind of observer brought about by modernity is no longer a mere observer, but a participant or active part in the art. Take, for example, L'Étaz, or The Cup by George Braque. The longer one studies it, the more is revealed. What can you see? World War I has been described as the Cubist War for many reasons. Perspective was a large part of that. Everyone's experience of the war was different. Think of the pilots flying over the trench lines. How differently did they see the trench line in comparison to a soldier who was living in it? Aerial perspective can be connected to Cubism, and partially because it looks cubist with the trench lines crossing a landscape in a diagram, but there is more depth to the idea than that. In order to recreate accurate representations of the landscape, series of photographs were taken in order to piece together the different perspectives in order to give a more complete understanding of what was seen from the airplane. But decoding these series of photographs required a new and different type of observer. He had to be an expert who could interpret and see past the distortions of what the photographs were showing. In that way, they could give them meaning, just as one does with Cubist works of art. The fractured, fragmented, and discontinuous aspects of the modern world are also evidenced in poetry, particularly from World War I. In Break of Day in the Trenches by Isaac Rosenberg, he describes waking in the trenches, the same as any other day. Time moves on. Yet this soldier gets a surprise, a rat to join him. In comparing the soldier's perspective with the rat's, this poet gives you fractured, fragmented, and discontinuous. Droll rat, the author calls him. They would shoot you if they knew your cosmopolitan sympathies. Now you have touched this English hand. We will do the same to a German soon, no doubt. If it be your pleasure to cross the sleeping greens between. A rat has no sympathies, no sides. His perspective is very different from the soldier's. The rat is free, yet the soldier is not. It's all about perspective. Here we compare the view of a rat with that of the soldier. A soldier should be strong, with fine limbs. He should be a haughty athlete. Shouldn't these be characteristics to ensure a man's survival? Yet it is the rat who grins as he passes men, strong men like this by, because his chance of life is greater. What do you see in our eyes at the shrieking iron and flame hurled through still heavens? What does the rat see? He witnesses the fear of man. The author also references the poppy, one of the only flowers to grow in the fields where the trenches were, a remnant that grew amidst the dead bodies in the destroyed fields from the Napoleonic War. They represented that death as they dropped to the ground. Yet the one behind the soldier's ear remained safe. This poem is Cubist in considering the fragmented views of war and death, using something as unsettling as the way a rat would have experienced it. Yeats, in his poem, The Lake Isle of Innisfree, also makes a contribution to Cubism through his use of simultaneity. He is standing on the roadway or on the pavement's gray, as he daydreams about a cabin on Innisfree. He paints what one might think of as a peaceful scene when first reading it, with a garden, a bee glade, crickets in the morning, noon's a purple glow, and evening full of linnets' wings. He can always hear the water lapping as if it is calling to him from the deep heart's core. He is in two places at once, physically on a roadway, in his mind's eye on Innisfree. This poem is Cubist also in that the more one interprets it, the more meaning can be found, depending on the reader's perspective. Some might think that an island full of bees, linnets, and crickets, with a garden to work day and night, is a hell more than a peaceful place. It's also interesting to consider that a roadway would be a noisy place, yet all he can hear is the call of the island and its lapping water and its bees and linnets and crickets. Cubist poetry is fragmented just as the world they were living in, confusing, changing, everything new, requiring someone to find out the meanings, to explore the perspectives, to interpret the distortions. Cubism broke the molds, made possible the expression of the fragmented new world they were living in.